declare the meeting open, and a special welcome to our new member, Mel. Mel Tudball, who is a parent representative. Are you representing the Welsh parents? And obviously to Sean. This is your second meeting, so welcome. Can we go on then to item 2, declarations of interest? Oh, sorry, apologies. Apologies, please, Geraint.
We've got apologies from councillors Phil Seaborn and Graham Smith.
I think we've had apologies from Dermot McChrystal. I think he's likely to be running a bit late, so he should be here a bit later. Can we move on then to item 2, declarations of interest? Dennis, could you take us through these, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's really in relation to item 7. There's a report there relating to the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee, and as you'll be aware, it refers to Westmont School and Crossy-Keylog School. So it's just to advise members that if you're a governor on either of those schools, or if a person with whom you live, or any person with whom you have a close personal association works or attends the school, you will have to declare personal interest, but it's personal only, so it's not prejudicial. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members. Councillor Cameron.
Sorry, was it Crossy-Keylog? Yes.
Yes, it was.
I've got a grandson and a granddaughter at Crossy and a grandson at Llantarnam. I don't know whether that's much.
Councillor Cameron.
I'm obviously an LEA governor at Crossy School.
Sorry, you see the minutes there from pages 5 to 14. Are you happy to accept these as a true record of the meeting?
Yes.
All agreed? Move on then to agenda item 4, the action sheet. That's the actions there that have been completed. Councillor Davis, you asked for more information there. Did you have that information? On the decision?
Which one that was?
10.1 there. You asked for more information. Do you have that information?
Yes, yeah. I did have an email.
Okay. 5, the summary of key decisions. And these go from pages 19 to 26. So if we look there at page 23, decisions of the Cabinet, and decisions of the Leader, Executive Member, and decisions of the Chief Officer and Executive Member. Any questions? Councillor Rees?
Could they be sent a copy of the delivery plan, which is mentioned in decision ending in 03, right at the bottom of the page?
Please, yeah. I was going to suggest, actually, that maybe we put the Flying Start and the Early Intervention programme on our work schedule for the next session, to see how we're looking at that. So, in the meantime, could we have more information, please?
Yep. So that's one at the bottom of 23,
Yeah.
Oh,
Page 24. Any comments there? And page 25. Okay, we move on then to agenda item 6, our main item. And the purpose of our report today is to inform the committee of the progress made against the 5 recommendations made by Estyn following the inspection of 2011, and progress made against supplementary recommendations in follow-up monitoring visits. And you can see there our scrutiny activity. We've been asked to critically review the pace and extent of progress made against all Estyn recommendations. Right, we are waiting for the officer. Sharon Davis. Okay, we just go over the Scrutiny Committee is asked to critically review the pace and extent of progress made against all Eston recommendations. And the report has been submitted by Dermot McChrystal, the Head of Education Service. Do you wish to give us a fly-in visit through the report, or are you happy just to take questions?
Chair, I'm happy either way. If people find it would be helpful just to have a very quick 2-3 minute run through the sort of headlines and the context, I'm happy to do that. Clearly, this report looks at the progress we've made since the initial inspection back in 2011. That's an important thing to hold on to, because you've obviously had updates since then following monitoring visits. But in our final monitoring visit, which we anticipate will be later in the autumn of this year, probably before the verified results come out, we've been told that it's likely to happen, so that means probably October, November, but we haven't got that date confirmed yet. They'll look at the extent of progress we've made right back to that that initial inspection. So what I've tried to summarise in the report, going through each of the recommendations, bearing in mind you've had a series of reports over the years, and so obviously you've had more data this year as well, is to look at summarising that progress that we've made and come up with where we are in terms of our self-evaluation at the moment, in determining how largely, fully, totally addressed we've addressed those recommendations. So at the end of each of the recommendation sections, I've tried to say where I think we are with each of those. I'm saying that in terms of recommendation 1 around standards, that we've largely addressed that recommendation. That was particularly focused on Key Stage 4, but not just Key Stage 4, so obviously we're looking at progress across the piece. I've said, I think I've put a caveat in there, that we are likely to go back and revisit that once we've got the initial results out in August. So we'll be updating our self-evaluation again in light, obviously, of that new information that comes through. In terms of NEETs, I've said we've fully addressed NEETs. We're now, in fact, the new data came out since the report's been written, and I think our NEETs figure now puts us 9th in Wales. So the progress that we've made before has now been extended, and that is secure. In terms of recommendation 3, in terms of self-evaluation, I believe I've said, and I'm double-checking now to make sure I have said this, but I think we've fully addressed that one as well. Thank you, Sharon. And that we've largely addressed then recommendations 4 and 5 around performance management, because we have some more work to do around performance management, I think, as a council, but certainly within education. We're just putting a new system in place, which I can talk in some detail about, to support and further develop our performance management systems. And partnership work is largely addressed as well. And again, 4 and 5, in fact, 2, 4 and 5 have been the subject of monitoring visits that you've had feedback on before, where we've had feedback from Eston already. So, Chair, I think that's a very quick run through the content of the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Rees?
I think I heard you say the last monitoring, or the final monitoring visit. Does that mean you know that we are coming out of special measures?
How I wish that were true, Councillor Rees. That is a slip of my tongue, I'm afraid. So I anticipate it will be our last monitoring visit. Clearly what I've said in the report today, I think we've got the evidence that we've made sufficient progress, that we're no longer in need of support from the Recovery Board or of intervention from the Minister. And I believe we're in a position now that we can come out of special measures. So clearly that's what that monitoring visit will look at. So it will be, what Eston have told us is that they'll come in and look at the 2 recommendations, that's standards, recommendation 1 and recommendation 3 around self-evaluation, and that they'll revisit briefly the other recommendations, because clearly we've already, to use a phrase that they've used, banked some progress, and they've already seen that, but they'll go back and reconfirm for themselves that we've maintained that progress and address any issues that they've raised with us in feedback. If I'm right, that means we should at that point come out of special measures.
Just as a follow-up to that then, so if that's the case, what will our Key Stage 4 results look like in 2016?
A year ahead. Obviously, in terms of our target setting process, we'll be going back through and looking at the cohort that's coming through. That target setting for 2016 will be complete by the third week in November of this year, and we'll be feeding back to scrutiny and to council at that point about where we anticipate we'll be. I think it's a bit early for us to be predicting the outcome there. We anticipate at the moment, I think you've had some data just as a brief summary as well, of where we've been over the last this year. So this year just gone, our overall figure was at 53.4. Our target for the coming year is actually 60. Okay, now, we're just in the process of getting an update and progress towards those targets from the EAS now. So we are confident we'll make another, this will be the fourth year of continuous improvement, and that we'll see another steady improvement. But I won't be able to give you that figure with confidence until we've done the target setting process with schools, and that is due in as a statutory sort of deadline that we have to have it in by, I think it's the 20th of November or thereabouts.
Karen?
Thank you. With the what appears to be hoped for disappearance of the Recovery Board, the Recovery Board is being described as our critical friend. When we emerge from special measures, who then will be our critical friend?
Obviously, this committee is part of our critical friend process as well, and we always welcome that feedback. In terms of the way we've been working with the Recovery Board, the Children and Young People's Improvement Board, Improvement Partnership Board, I'll get my terminology right, is really the parallel board now to the Recovery Board. So if we take a paper to the Recovery Board, that goes through the CYPB, and it's the role of that board to then act as that critical friend going forward. And clearly, we've made significant progress in terms of our partnership arrangements. That was acknowledged in the last monitoring visit. We know, and I've said this in the report, that we've got more work to do in terms of securing further development around partnership work. In fact, where I was this morning was with colleagues from Health and Social Care meeting the Health and Social Care Minister and looking at how we can further secure some of that work. So we know we have a bit more to do, but that would be where that critical friend voice comes through, but also through our other performance management processes within Council. Scrutiny is part of that. The performance review measures that cycle that we now have in place with Cabinet is part of that as well. And I'm keen to look at how we can further develop a more 360-degree sort of feedback process as well with schools and chairs of governors, and that's something that we've been talking to head teachers about and to chairs. And again, it's something that we'll be talking to heads about next week's meeting.
But you see where I'm coming from. I mean, the Recovery Board is there. All the other things that you've mentioned are there now. The only thing that's actually disappearing is the Recovery Board. So you are happy that the Improvement Board and the new, I can't remember what it's called, CYPB.
Yeah, obviously, this is all contingent on Aston agreeing with our self-evaluation. And obviously, this set of results that we're having this year is probably one of, they're always critical because every number's a child, and that's the bit we always need to remind ourselves about. So every year is important, but this year, this set of results will confirm or not whether we know ourselves well enough. And I think fundamentally that was one of the biggest concerns that Aston had, was were we honestly able to know ourselves, know our schools. And what I've tried to put through this short report is we now have put processes and systems in place which mean that together with the EAS, we know where our schools are at. We know when we need to intervene. We don't have to rely on Estin, which was a criticism that came through previously, to tell us when a school was in difficulty, because actually we know, and we can intervene in a more timely way. That means as a result of those changes, we should be seeing increased progress in schools, and that's coming through in exam results. But also, one of the things that, as you know, we've been working on with schools around assessment, and teacher assessment, is we should also now start to see improvement in terms of national test outcomes as well as so in terms of literacy and numeracy testing, as well as GCSE results, for instance. So I think we're well placed to do that. So Eston will make that determination. We've said to the Recovery Board already, we don't think the day we get that letter that says, well done, you no longer require intervention, that we necessarily want to say goodbye to the Recovery Board. I think there's a process for us to look at, well, what other value if the Minister agrees to this, because it's a fantastic resource that we've access to that's, that's been incredibly helpful. So I'm not keen to necessarily just simply see a switch being flicked and that's it. So, so we want to have a discussion with the Recovery Board about post-statutory intervention, what other support, what other process we might need to look at, and that's already been part of some initial discussions. But clearly we need to wait for Eston and then the Minister to make the appropriate determinations.
Okay. Can we just ask, obviously the Key Stage 4 performance has improved year on year, but is this happening quickly enough for us to improve our relative position compared to the rest of Wales?
Obviously, from the information, the brief summary, if you don't have it in front of you, we've moved up an ordinal position each year from 2012, when we were 17th in Wales. In fact, we were 20th in 2011. Then 2012, we moved to 17th, then 16th, then 15th in 2014. So over that period from 2011 to 2014, there's been a 10% improvement in terms of level 2 results. Is that fast enough? Is that quick enough? Is that good enough? I think no one's going to be satisfied that that's as good as it should be. Our aspiration in the past, I think, has been that we should be around average. Well, that can't be a good aspiration to have. So clearly we want to be in the top quartile. We want to be one of the best authorities in Wales. We want the best possible outcomes. So the obvious answer is no, it's not been quick enough, because otherwise we wouldn't have been in special measures. Yeah? So that's the simple answer. Has the rate of progress improved quickly enough over the last couple of years? We know, and we've rehearsed this at this committee before, that we've seen some disappointing performances in a number of individual schools. What I would say is that the reasons around those missing the targets the schools had, those instances last year, there were 2 schools in particular where there was a significant variance in the headline sort of target and then the performance of the school. That we've worked closely with those schools. You've actually worked with them as well in terms of subcommittees and looked at the subcommittees looking at those schools' performance. We're confident that we've got much better systems in place. The things that we put in a few years ago are now embedding in terms of tracking systems, in terms of support from the EAS, and we're much more confident now that we know that where schools are saying this is where pupils are, this is where we think they will be, is now a much more accurate reflection. Schools are better placed to actually make sure they can reach those targets. So we've got more confidence now that our targets are much more realistic than was previously the case.
Councillor Davis?
Yes. About a year or so ago, I remember when I first came onto this committee, and we had a thing about Key Stage 4, and they were saying that one of the biggest problems that we had at that time was that basically was that schools were having to, well, for want of a better word, cram when it came to Key Stage 4, because it seemed that Key Stage 2 and 3 weren't good enough to push, and suddenly they had to cram at Key Stage 4 to get the results up. And how would you say that progress is being made on that we aren't having to cram at that stage, at Key Stage 4, and that they were actually they were beginning to identify at Key Stage 2 and 3?
Obviously, the place I would want to start that answer is around teacher assessment and making sure that, as again we've rehearsed before, we haven't really been honest at all across the piece in terms of where our performance has been at Key Stage 2 and 3. And again, that's something that Eston, as part of their visits before the inspection in October 2011, was saying to us that when teacher assessment came in, there was a meteoric improvement in Key Stage 2 and 3 performance. Clearly, over the last year, we've been working very closely with all schools, primaries and secondaries, to look at how we can have a much more we can have much more confidence that the results that we're reporting in Key Stage 2 and 3 are more accurate, because that way then we can make sure we're intervening at the appropriate time to make sure that those pupils don't have to wait until they're 14 before interventions are put in place. So has progress in that regard been quick enough in terms of, are we still, if the committee went around secondary schools now, and this is a good time to do it, mind there's only a few weeks really until the results, would you see groups of pupils being hot-housed, of having particular sort of catch-up? Yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing in itself, because some pupils will always need that, but I think the path that heads have absolutely firmly put themselves on is to be honest about our assessment processes to make sure then, on the basis of that assessment, in primary and in Key Stage 3, that we can then intervene more meaningfully and more accurately. So I think over time we'll see a lessening of the need for that type of intervention. But clearly there's a tail in the system that means that we still have to make sure we look after every child wherever they are, and some children will still require that sort of intervention for some time to come.
Would you say that this sort of thing really needs to start at foundation?
Yes.
Yeah,
So, I mean, the importance of assessment and the accuracy of assessment, how can you plan for teaching if you don't know where your child is at? And that's really been the heart of the discussion we've been having with heads who've absolutely got that. But of course, this is a national issue. It isn't just one that Torvine faces, and it's certainly not one that in South East Wales in this consortium that is something that we're alone in by no small measure. One of the things that's happened in the last week is that the EAS have now been successful in being put forward as an I'm trying to think of the right terminology, but basically the EAS and I will become part of a pilot for Welsh Government that's looking at how we can further support the veracity of teacher assessment. They'll be looking at how they can make sure that the moderation of teacher assessment is further supported, and some additional resource that's now being that will come to play. I have no doubt that work has been supported by what we've done as a council, what heads have done with this. And we'll have a little bit more detail on that over the next couple of weeks. We hope to be able to give heads a bit more information on that next week. So that will also further support what we're doing in Torvine. And clearly one of the things that I'm keen to do, particularly with Welsh medium schools, is to make sure, because some of the issues around testing for them, that they also get that further support in terms of moderation of teacher assessment, which we know is a little bit of a gap we want to close down.
And just one other thing about the role of governors in making sure that they are kept fully informed of how, I mean, particularly at, starting right at primary level. Now that we've got now nearly all our schools are all-in-one primary schools. There's not infants and then juniors. They're all-in-one primary schools. That to be told by the head teachers when we get foundation phase about a particular year, to be kept heads up about how that particular year group is doing and how they will then progress and their progression through the system.
Under the new categorisation, the new model of categorisation, step 2 is all about leadership, and that includes the governors now. So really speaking, there's no place now for governors not to hide, not that they were hiding, but they have got to be now taking the responsibility, and they now have to be seen as working alongside the head teacher and not just accepting what the head teacher tells them. So they do need to be more of a critical friend, and they do need to be more effective, because that's part of the categorisation. So to be a yellow or green school, they have to be effective and they have to be working alongside the head teacher. Otherwise, they're not going to get past amber.
And just to add to that, I mean, clearly one of the points then that we want to make sure, and we're having this discussion with the EAS in terms of the training that's available for governors, and something that Sharon and I do on a half-termly basis is we meet with we invite all chairs of governors. We get about 50% attendance, I think. Is to look at actually, what training these two governors have. There will always be, Julian Dorostic obviously did some training for members before, and that's akin to what he provides for governors. There will be an ongoing need to maintain that level of training for governors as obviously as governors change, and in terms of some of the educational sort of landscape changes a bit, to make sure that governors are enabled to actually hold head teachers to account and understand the data, because it isn't straightforward sometimes. So that's something we can...
Say on that, I mean, as a chair of governors myself, I need to declare me I'm chair of Nant Celyn. I can verify that there have been meetings for the chairs of governors, and they were quite well attended, at least the one that I attended. Councillor Cameron, sorry.
Thank you. Well, I think until the time comes that the only people who are on governors are ex-teachers, we're never going to reach that stage, because unless you are a teacher, as much as you can go to the training courses and whatever, you can't have a grasp of things, and you do have to, that was my experience, you are very much having to accept what the head tells you, unless you can go then and check with somebody else, and you might find it wasn't quite like that. And I've done things like that. But one thing I noticed looking at this chart, why is the science figure gone up to second? What are we doing that's so different with the science that we can't transfer to all the other things?
Yeah, I think in terms of science and the way that figure is calculated through the use of BTEC and of course choices that schools have, we've seen a very significant difference then between science outcomes and GCSE, English and Maths. I think we'll see some change in that as the curriculum changes over this year, I think, isn't it? Yeah, this September. So, I mean, one of the key things for us, going back to the national test outcomes, and why that for us is quite an important litmus test, is that despite the fact that we're still getting those outcomes at GCSE, when we look at the extrapolated results for pupils from years 2 to 9 in terms of literacy and numeracy, overall our pupils are coming out still 18th and 19th in Wales. So that there is clearly an issue for us in terms of literacy and numeracy skills across the piece, and that has to be a focus for our intervention. I don't think necessarily, and I know that Mike's here too, you might have a view on this, that it means that we're doing something phenomenally different. I think we've got some very good science teachers, and I really want to, we've got good teachers across the piece in all curriculum areas. But I think it's been a function of curriculum choices in the way that up to this point we've been able to make good choices in terms of making sure that young people achieve really well in science. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's something qualitatively different going on in science that we're not achieving in English and Maths. I think that's more to do with curriculum choices in the way that schools have been able to count different courses towards that figure. So we'll see some change as well as English literature no longer counts towards the English result as well. So with curriculum changes coming through, I think we'll see some variation in those results over the next year or two.
Can I just say, is that what you're saying, possibly that the pupils who go into the science route then maybe are the more able or something, and that's why... No? I can't...
Yeah, no, I think it is more down to the courses that you can enrol pupils on, and that has contributed to that figure in nearly all of our schools.
Bring Mike
perhaps I'll offer some clarification. Just being a little bit careful what I say. GCSE science is a science course that is fundamentally based on examinations. BTEC science is non-examinable, and it focuses on different elements. GCSE science is more likely to examine the child's understanding of science, whereas BTEC science is more likely to examine the child's application of science. And they can be supported to produce their own work much more effectively than students who turn up on the day to do exams. In simple terms, BTEC science is much more accessible for children than GCSE science, and it is changing with the new curriculum. At this moment in time, and certainly over the last 3 years, our schools have been targeting more and more students to do the BTEC science course than the GCSE science course, which has resulted in a significant upshift in science results.
Thank you for that. Councillor Karen, did you wish to...
Yeah, if I could. I was slightly critical of 5.1 at the pre-agenda meeting because You said Key Stage 4 outcomes, right, in year 2011. You gave us the percentage that we had and the percentage in Wales, and we were obviously under the average. And then when you give us the 14 figures, you gave us our percentage, and you give us our place. Now, obviously, I understand you're not trying to mislead the committee, but you have to a degree compared apples with pears. And I know that you've now told us in 2011 we were 20th. What was the Welsh average in 2014?
What's average 2014 was 55.4, so we were 2% off the Wales average in 2014.
And if I could follow that up and say, well, given our demographic and our deprivation levels, where should we be in Wales? I mean, I know we want to be in quarter one.
The standing sort of understanding that Aston would have is that we should be 11th, we should be 11th, 12th, we should be right in the middle. We should be right in the average point. Which is why in the past, as I've said, I think that's been the aspiration, and clearly one that we didn't fulfil.
But we want to get beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you wish to come in?
One of the things that concerns me is obviously we are changing the way that the things which are accounted for, i.e., for instance, we're moving literature out of the, of the assessment now and so on. And to me, it's going to. Whilst I agree the change probably needed to be made, I don't see then how that's going to allow us then to truly assess where we're tracking, because suddenly we're back on zero again. We're suddenly back on zero. We're then in a situation now where we've got to monitor the performance for the next 3 to 5 years again, because we've changed the rules.
Okay. And the changes we're talking about aren't something that we're doing ourselves. It's something that the Welsh Government have brought in. And and that's been the case in England, I think, I can't think how long for, but I don't think English literature counted in England towards the 5 A stars, including English and maths. It didn't count as the English part of that. So we'll be in the same position as everyone else in Wales. So if there's an impact here, we would expect to see that replicated elsewhere. So in terms of baseline, I understand the point you're making, but equally, I'm sure it will be argued by people who've suggested this, that it's resetting the baseline for everyone at the same time. And this is a more meaningful way of looking at children's functioning within the English language and the application of English language. And I think that's where they're coming from. So will it make any difference? Perhaps, yes. But we should be in the same position then as everyone else, and it focuses us back on where are the core skills in terms of application of literacy and numeracy for all pupils, and that has to be part of the discussion that we have with heads moving forward in terms of where we want our focus on school improvement to be over the coming 12 months.
Sorry.
As I say, I'm not disagreeing whether or not that change needed to be made at all, because I do believe as an employer, the standards of literacy, just from interviewing, even just I interview in Wales and I interview in England, so there is a difference between just the handwriting, if nothing else. When I see application forms, it's a huge gap. But my point is this: is obviously as a scrutiny committee, we're then in that situation then where we have, what we're always looking to do is to create a natural progression. We'll then lose that natural progression, and we'll only then be able to measure ourselves against Wales. Not what we've done before, not what we've done, not our historical data, because essentially most of our historical data will be irrelevant. That's my biggest concern. Because we're talking about obviously everything from, since Eston come in, obviously 2011, and created the special measure situation. We're then essentially setting all that aside again and starting again. And the only way really to see any real progression will be if we monitor it over the next 3 to 4 years. which again then gives us the situation where that's another cohort of children, if we're not doing the right things, that are suddenly failed.
The key to this, I pick up on one thing, which is that it wasn't Essendon that created special measures, we created that because we weren't getting those outcomes for those pupils. And one of the reasons we weren't getting the outcomes is that we didn't know our pupils well enough. So again, the theme I put back in this report is I think we do know our pupils well enough now. So while there will be some change in terms of, are we comparing apples with pears? Is it exactly the same? No. But we know where our pupils are. We've got the assessment information that we need to be able to track pupils' progress between primary and secondary and look at the value added between. So while there'll be some change, and we'll be in the same position as everyone else in Wales, so the Wales picture and that national average and the South East Wales Consortium average, the same change will happen across that system at the same time, so that will give us comparability. Although there'll be a little caveat, there'll be an asterisk between this year and the years that follow. The key point for us is that we know our pupils well, and we can look at an individual pupil level and see that that child is progressing as well as they should be, and where they aren't, then we're intervening appropriately. And that's the nature of the discussions that we have through target setting, is the nature of the discussions we'll have through the next categorisation discussions that we have in the coming year as well. And for us, that's the critical bit that we must know about. So it's not the global figure, which is really important and that counts for a lot. Actually, it comes back down to, do we know each individual pupil well enough? And that's the point for us that signifies, I think, I'm confident that Essendon will be able to see that we've made significant progress in, because we now know our individual learners in a way that we didn't when they came in 2011.
I'm quite happy to embarrass the head of St Albans as he's here on the committee. Where would we be without St Albans? So what I'm sort of asking is the continued success of St Albans skewing our results and making it easier for us to assume everything is okay in Key Stage 4 in low-performing schools?
No. In a sense, I'm going to go back to the answer I just gave before. When we look at target setting now, I think it's quite radically different from where we've been before. St Albans has been accurate over time in the way it sets targets for its pupils and then delivers on those targets. Okay, that's absolutely been the case. Have the rest of our schools been equally as accurate? And the answer has been no. So in terms of, is that improving? I think yes. So, the achievement of pupils in St Albans is excellent. Okay, and is it something that we want all of our schools to aspire to get to that level? And the answer is yes. Have they put the mechanisms in place now to be able to begin to do that in a way that they haven't before? I think the answer is also yes.
I think you said they'd started to put those mechanisms in place. Well, we've been doing this for a few years now. So why are we still only on the starting line?
Yeah, started and beginning to deliver on those systems. So the system's been put in place. You're right, for some time, and going back to the monitoring visit in 13 and probably before that, I think the beginnings of those systems were in place. Have they embedded? Have we fully? Have we absolutely got confidence up to this point that those were really delivering? The answer has to be no, because last year, clearly in the two schools, there was some significant variation. We've made further improvement. Schools have made further improvement, I should be more accurate, over the last year. We've got confidence through our relationship with the EAS and the way that we've also required them to report to us. The evidence is now in place that those systems are really embedded, and we can have confidence, which is why I've said in recommendation 1 that we've largely addressed it. We have confidence that actually we're now in a position that we haven't been before.
What level of confidence? 100%?
Largely addressed, I think in Essendon speak says that we're about 75 to 80%, because fully addressed would be 100%. So we're really much more secure. There is further work to do, but we cannot at this point say we have absolute confidence that every single child is going to reach the target. And in fact, I would be feeling a little bit more confident in answering your question if we just timing had been slightly different, because clearly what we're now expecting from the EAS is the updated report on progress towards targets for all pupils in schools, and that's the report we're just waiting on for now. That'll be further proof for our self-evaluation that we actually know ourselves really, that we've got confidence in the systems, and that's just a matter of timing that we would have had. we'll have that shortly from the ES.
I'm just a little bit concerned. If we've known for, let's say, the last 3 years that St Albans is 100%, and we're 100% confident about St Albans, why are we still only 75% confident about a few of the other schools?
You're pinning me down to a number, and I wish I hadn't said it now. Because I'm not sure I would say 70. I haven't thought about it like that before, so I probably will retract 75%.
All I'm saying is there's a gap, and it seems to be taking a long time to bridge this gap.
I think there's been a series of, being blunt, and this is something that we've rehearsed again over time at this committee and elsewhere, is that some of the systems in some of the schools just weren't there. Schools felt that the tracking systems were in place, believed that actually they had put appropriate measures in place, and that clearly wasn't the case. That's part of the reason why we're in special measures. That is fundamentally actually why, at the heart of why we're in special measures, because we didn't know ourselves well enough. We took too much on account, we took too much in faith, and weren't testing well enough with schools. Did they really know their pupils well enough? One of the reasons why I'm now much, much more confident that that isn't the case anymore across all of our schools, and I include primaries in that, as well as secondaries, is that in the target setting process we went through last November, it was very clear from the information we had in from schools and from the EAS that there was a much more meaningful understanding of where pupils were functioning. And it was a very small number, less than half a dozen, of cases we had to go back to schools and say, we're not quite sure how you can justify that target. And those discussions were very short. It was very clear that actually in all but maybe one or two instances, those targets were based on a very detailed knowledge of individual pupils. So to move from where we were, which was a position where there was a very disparate range of practice across schools, to a point now where actually we've got confidence in all of our secondary schools that those systems are in place. They're slightly different in each of the schools, but that's just a function of the variation in the way the schools are set up. But those systems are absolutely in place. Our challenge advisors are particularly sensitised to the need to make sure that those systems are accurate and are reporting well. We now have a system in place where the ES report to us on a termly basis about progress against those targets, and as I say, it's just a matter of timing. We don't have that available to us for this particular meeting, but that will be available shortly. We are much, much more confident that we have that accurate picture, and that schools are changing tack where they need to for individual learners if they're not performing in the way that they need to be.
Mr. Caron, did you wish to come in?
Yeah, I've listened to all that about how we target, how we look at each pupil. How then does the Schools Challenge Cymru, I mean, is it just funding, or does that have a significant role to play in those schools that have that money? And what do you expect extra out of those schools that you're not that you're not going to expect, but how much extra would you expect from those schools because they've got that Schools Challenge Cymru?
With the Schools Challenge Cymru, they were the 40 least performing schools in Wales, and we've got 4 in Torfaen. So yes, they do get a considerable amount of funding, which they have to put a very detailed action plan against, and they can't replicate anything that the PDG or any other forms of funding. It's got to be different, and it is about closing the gap between free school meals and any other vulnerable child. So it is looking at a whole holistic and not just standards. Obviously that's going to be one of the key indicators against the impact on their actions, but it is looking at building, for some schools, is building self-confidence for these children and attendance, because if the child isn't at school, then you can't educate them. And I know that's a problem for every school at some degree, but there's a whole different approach to it, and that's what the funding allows it for then. And there's a very detailed monthly report then that these schools have to produce, if you like, and report back on each action on their action plan and how the funding's been used. And everything has been approved by the Welsh Government. It's not the LA, and it's not the Schools Challenge Cymru advisor. It goes beyond that. So every penny spent has got to have approval from Welsh Government. And they have come back, not for our schools, but in other authorities where the action plans haven't been accepted or they've had to be refined. And even when they have, and schools then have asked for the money, they've come back and said no, because you've deviated from your action plan, you need to go back to it. So it's being monitored at every step of the way, and the Schools Challenge Cymru advisor, which works directly for the Welsh Government, reports to the Welsh Government on a fortnightly basis, as on top of our Accelerated Improvement Board meetings.
And just to add to that, if I may, Chair, I mean, clearly one of the things that the Ministers have been very clear about is that this money isn't going to continue forever. Okay, this is time limited. So really one of the outcomes that we're looking for the Minister's looking for, we're looking for from schools in Schools Challenge Cymru, is that enabling resource means that the systems that the schools have then developed and put in place and really got honed mean that they've got that continuity beyond the life of the funding. So the funding there is to pump prime to get that practice and culture shifted in schools, and maybe sometimes to look at particular projects that tackle a particularly difficult group of pupils or whatever. So the culture within not just the staff body but the pupil body and the parents as well changes, so that going forward at the end of that funding, which we think there'll be one more year and that will be it, I don't anticipate any funding beyond next year, that those systems are embedded and therefore are sustainable over time, so that that progress that we expect to see can be maintained without that additional resource.
Can I just bring Councillor Cameron in? Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, we seem to be talking about the same thing. I mean, I've been here nearly 3 years now, and I don't think the talk has changed an awful lot. What worries me is that in that sort of 3 years, there are pupils, and that's a large percentage of their education, even if we ignore primary, it's a large part of their education in secondary. And, you know, how do you think that is going to affect those pupils, and why are we still kind of talking about the obvious? If the pupils are not in school, of course they're not going to learn. You know, why haven't we got down to basics a lot quicker? And why is the progress, to my mind, knowing that we were in special measures when I joined, and we still are, so slow?
What I'd say is that, you know, if you look at the attendance rates in secondary and primary schools, that actually has improved over that period as well, quite significantly. If you look at the exclusion rate in secondary schools, the number of days lost to exclusion in secondary schools has halved over the last 2 years. You know, in terms of the progress, in terms of level 2 plus, level 5 GCSEs, including English and Maths, that's improved by 10% over the last period since the inspection as well. Is it good enough yet? No. Okay. But in terms of arresting the place that we were in and arresting the decline that we were in effect, I think we've achieved that. I think schools are in a very different place now, and the expectations that schools have of themselves has fundamentally shifted. I think our systems, in terms of how we as a local authority know our schools, and our relationship with schools as well, I should say, has also improved radically. Do I think that when the Recovery Board go, if that's what happens, that we'll just peter along and get 0.5% here and 1%? No, that's not clearly what we're trying to achieve. And I think fundamentally for me, one of the big changes is that head teachers are working with the local authority now in a way that they haven't been before. I think we've changed the way that we engage with schools to the point where schools are really taking the lead now in a range of school improvement areas and a range of different topics that will see further progress happen. So I'm as frustrated as everyone else that we're not in a better place than we are. I think realistically, and I can only take responsibility from the point where I was appointed, I think over that period, over the last 18 months, I think we have now arrived in a place where we're much more secure and have put all those basic things. And you're right, that's a really good point to make. These are the basics. If you don't get the basics right, you don't get it. You can't make progress. But I think that's what we're saying to Aston in terms of where our self-evaluation is. We now know ourselves. We have those building blocks in place. And there's a lot more to do still, because we're not trying to say we're a good authority. We're saying we absolutely are solid. We know we're adequate. We've got bits of good coming through quite clearly. There are a number of things that we can point to and we can build on. And I anticipate within 2 or 3 years, well, 2 years really, we should be seeing ourselves as a good authority. But that does take some time.
Just say, to end on a positive, so you're telling me that by the end of our terms, really, they correlate with each other. So by the end of the 2017, then, you think we'll be in a far, far better place?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry?
Is that place
11? It can't be seen as 11th. It can't be seen as 11th now. Look, in terms of looking at ordinal positions, what I'm keen to come back to is where's the position of every individual learner in Torvine, and are we comfortable that that learner is making the right progress for them? I think some of the things that we've been looking at and our thinking's been focused on because of Eston, because of the criteria that we're looking at, may not be the way that going forward post Eston that we only want to look at. So in terms of looking at how children are learning in a wider sense and the value added that children have between when they come into school and when they leave has to be part of the emerging discussion that we have going forward. And I hope that the national model takes that on board as well. So I don't want to duck the question about are we going to be 11th, but I think there's more to how we measure pupils' progress than just that as well.
Lynn and then Sean.
Just to try and drag us back to the Schools Challenge Cymru, I mean, you mentioned the gap between free school meals and non-free school meals. I mean, there's two ways you can close that gap. You can increase the free school meals or you can decrease the non-free school meals. We're obviously not trying to do the latter. So we should therefore see a greater improvement in the Schools Challenge Cymru schools than we would expect to see in the other schools? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
No. These schools in Schools Challenge Cymru were below where they should have been in the first place. So they're basically playing catch-up to get to where to get to, if you like, on average, free school meals. Well, that's always, the gap is always going to be there in any case. So they're playing catch-up to get to a level playing field, if you like. And under the new categorisation for secondary schools, part of step 2 is to do with free school meals. So the percentage, I think, Mike will correct me, is 27.2% free school meals. If that's the benchmark that the Welsh Government have set. So if they're within that, then they can't get above amber. So, schools have got to get to there in any case. So that the School Challenge Cymru schools were that much behind in any case. So, so they're always going to be having to get there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that wasn't what I was trying to get at, really. What I was trying to ascertain is not that you would expect the Schools Challenge Cymru schools to be better than the other two. I mean, that would have been really helpful. But what I meant was, if all of our schools have to go up by a significant percentage to get to 11th. I mean, so what I'm saying to you is, would you expect that the Schools Challenge Cymru results to improve, not to be above the other two schools, but to improve in a greater fashion than the other two schools?
I think the critical thing, again, goes back to the target setting process, and regardless if they're in Schools Challenge Cymru or not, all schools have looked at where their pupils are and where they should be. So what I'd expect is that all the School Challenge Cymru schools, along with all the other schools, should come out where the targets are saying, or roughly where the targets are saying, because there's always going to be some variation. The Minister's made it very clear for schools in Schools Challenge Cymru that his expectations are absolutely unmovable and that he won't tolerate schools not reaching those targets. And that's part of the pressure on those Schools Challenge Cymru challenge advisors in those schools to make sure that, through the process that Sharon's mentioned, that very close monitoring, that schools do come out. So every school should have an appropriate target for them, given the context of that school, because even within that 40 schools, there's a massive variation. So I think, for us, it comes back to each time, what's the context for the individual learner, what's the context for the school, are the targets meaningful? So my expectation is that those schools will achieve those targets.
Obviously, I'm sure everybody would agree, and we all, the sort of figures speak for themselves, really, that child attendance has a huge correlation between that and the child's end achievement or attainment. What I'm a little bit sort of challenging, really, is what are the authority doing to ensure that parents are aware of that correlation? We automatically assume that every parent knows that the more their child goes to school, the better they do in life. But, you know, that's not, that we're taking that as a given. You know, and, you know, I think we seem to be relying on the individual schools to drive that message through to the parents, where, as an authority, we know, you know, we know for a fact that we need to get that child attendance up. Yet we're just relying on somebody else to help us achieve that. You know, what are we doing as an authority to drive that message through directly to parents, not through the schools, but as, you know, just show that correlation. You know, the average child, if he achieves 95%, will not, on average, get X, Y, or Z. Yeah, and the average child who has 75% will normally get A, B, and C. You know, we automatically assume that parents know this, but we don't know they know this. That's my question really. What are we doing about that?
Does this come under communication?
One of the things that we noticed when our performance around attendance really dipped, okay, was about 3-4 years ago, was that we'd taken our eye off the ball, and the point that you're making, I think, is, you know, you need to keep that message fresh, and you've got to keep revisiting it, and that was clearly one of the things that we'd lost sight of. So we commissioned Professor Ken Reid, who came in, worked with us, schools. We looked again at our whole attendance strategy, and in fact that's something we've recently done with Ken Reid through the we've done again through the consortium. And what we've done over the last couple of years is put items into online talks to do exactly what you said. Now we haven't done that for some time. That's something that we're looking to do again in the summer, later in the summer, particularly with holidays coming up and so on, so it is a timely issue. So last year we did quite a bit of work around making sure that that message was getting out, which meant that I get lots of letters from parents telling me why they thought it was really inappropriate that they shouldn't be allowed to take their children out of school. And I've had a few of those for a bit, so that is a timely reminder we probably need to refresh. But that is something that we're looking to do, and we do on a cyclical basis, is to try and make sure that parents are aware of their own responsibilities. And let's just be very clear on this. That is the parents' responsibility to make sure that their children go to school, and that it's not okay to take the child out to go on holiday, unless there are very exceptional circumstances. And cost isn't one of those. So I think that's a timely reminder, and we'll look at that again about how we make sure we reinvigorate that message to parents.
Not sure.
It is that thing, you know. It seems to be that I'm not against the whole, the whole ethos of, you know, sort of penalising and so on. You know, that seems to be the thing these days. Well, let's essentially, you know, beat people with a stick for taking their kids out of school during term time. And that, you know, it's not something that my parents would have ever even dreamed of doing. So, you know, I'm not against that mentality, but it's trying to create the positive associative conditioning that, well, hang on, you know, not, oh, well, if you take your child out, that, you know, that there's a negative, you know, we're going to penalise you. Well, actually, if you keep your child in, your child will have a better future. You know, and we seem to, the last 3 years or so, we seem to be driving this message home. Well, you know, if you take your child out of school, we're going to penalise you, we'll fine you, and da-da-da-da. And it's all negative. It's all negative. And we wonder why people stop listening to the message. You know, if I came to you every day and said, oh, well, hang on, you know, if I came to you every day and said, well, you know, well, if you don't brush your teeth, you're going to get cavities. And one of the major changes that we've seen recently is the number of people who walk around with bright white teeth. Why? Because they feel better. So since that change has come along, you know, because it's a positive message, well, you feel better about yourself and so on, everything's changing. And this is what I'm saying, is if we deliver a positive message, yes, we have to have the stick there. Yes, that has to be there. That has to be that risk or, you know, potential punishment, for want of a better word. But there has to be, look, you know, if your child is 95%, on average, in Wales, that child is going to attain, because we have those figures, don't we? We have those benchmarks, and in turn, that will on average, will average, that they will be able to attain this type of job or whatever it may be. And that's my point, really, is just that's where we need, you know, in my opinion, and it is only my opinion, but that's where I feel that we need to step away a little bit from the whole thing of saying, right, okay, well, hang on, if you take your kids out of school, we're going to beat you with a stick. When actually, well, if you keep your child in school, the best news is your child's, you know, potentially going to be able to look after you when you get old.
I can only agree with what you're saying. One of the things I need to point out, though, is that if you look at the reasons why our attendance figures aren't even better than they are at the moment, and it's not been a straightforward year, and I think we could be making more progress in a number of schools than we currently are. But one of the biggest issues for us is longer-term non-attenders. So we seem to be looking at the most sort of recent data set. We seem to be getting those casual non-attenders. We're tackling those more effectively, but we still have a much smaller number of youngsters who aren't attending for 80% or less, and that's a significant issue for us. So just in terms of fines, we haven't issued any fixed penalty notice fines. We haven't issued any. We do take people to court occasionally, but that's a last resort. We have a very clear process worked out where we only do that after everything else has failed. But one of the things that we know we'll have to focus in on is looking at that group of youngsters, but let's be frank, the families who tolerate the fact that, you know, being off school regularly, a day a week, the equivalent of a day a week is the norm. So we know we've got a piece of work to do with the EWS and schools over the next year on that. That'll be supported by some of the new national standards that have come out for the induction of educational welfare officers, and we're looking at that to see what else we can do to think freshly about how we work with schools over the coming year.
Yeah, it says here, are there any risks associated? I'd like to rephrase that and say, how big are the risks associated with developing a new post-16 facility which may recruit some of our best teachers from the sixth forms in the secondary schools that we already have?
It's a tricky one to answer that in terms of, I think your point is, are we going to see a movement of some of our best teachers out? One of the things that the first things I asked the college about was their experience in Blaenau Gwent, when obviously they looked at a very similar sort of development there. What happened, the feedback was, and this isn't predictive of what will happen in Torvine, but their experience has been that when they made an offer to anyone who might have been at risk in Blaenau Gwent, when they were developing the new campus there, they actually didn't get many requests at all from people who were then teaching sixth form. In fact, they had more requests from people who were teaching GCSE, who were looking to change their career direction and wanted to move into FE at the time. So that they didn't see a huge movement out of mainstream schools, out of schools into the college at that point. Clearly, we won't know that until we get into discussions later on. In fact, we won't. Obviously, the next big step is to get feedback from Welsh Government, which we expect to get in early May. So it's only a few weeks away about the Outland business case. But previous experience with the college has been that they haven't seen a significant shift of staff out of secondary schools into the college.
Just a very simple yes or no answer for this one. I'm just out to give some clarity. It was a point raised earlier. So when our formal relationship with the Recovery Board ends, you're suggesting that it would be in the interest of the Council for the son or daughter of the Recovery Board to be in existence to help us forward in the future?
It has to be yes or no.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. With a caveat or three, if I get an opportunity to talk about it, then I will.
Can I just ask before we move on, if the changes to the science curriculum are going to affect the science figure, how will it affect the CSI if science is all part of that figure?
Again,
are we prepared for the dip then it would be?
If there were to be a variation, it would be something that I suspect would be felt across all authorities and all schools in Wales, because what's been happening around the use of BTEC is not something that's particular to Torvine. So if there is going to be an impact, we'll see, again, it's back to the point about is the baseline going to shift? And I suspect we'll see that change. So will there be an impact in CSI? Probably. but we don't know until we see what happens. But that would be mirrored, I would imagine, across most authorities. I don't think we're in any way unique in our use of BTEC, in the way schools are using it here.
Any other questions on this topic? If not, we'll move on then to recommendation 3. Take action to reduce the number of NEET young people, who are not in education, employment or training. Questions on this?
One of the concerns which was has been put to me about this measure is the fact that it is a snapshot. And the concern that was put to me was, is this snapshot a good enough measure for showing what is really happening in the system? Is that it is shown at is a snapshot at a particular point, and the concern was, does it give a full picture, a reliable picture? Indeed, are we? Indeed, when I talked to this individual, and the alarm bells rang on a measure, maybe this NEET figure is the next equivalent of teacher assessment.
In terms of right, we've got to go with what we're required to do in some ways. So in terms of the way that the national system is set up, it is a snapshot at any point in time. Is that figure accurate the next day? Well, is it the same? Not necessarily. And I think that's the concern that people have. Are we gearing systems towards simply getting the best possible number on that day when they count it, as opposed to what happens the day after, and the months and years after it as well? So one of the things that we've been working on, and obviously this sits with Karen and Karen Padfield and Dave Congreve's team as the lead, but we've been putting systems in place, obviously, to try and identify children who are potentially at risk of NEETs beforehand. So there's a rule called the risk of NEETs indicator, which is looking at a number of potential variables that make you more likely to be at risk of NEETs than not. Okay. And we're looking at that right into primary, and in fact, I'd like to extend that right into preschool, because there are a number of indicators that we can look at that make you more likely to experience difficulty in school and beyond. And actually, that's a flag. There are a number of flags that we can put in place that then look at how do we support you in terms of psychology support, in terms of families first support, and other agencies beyond education. So what we're trying to do, in other words, is not look at that date as being that's when we're going to focus in on, although clearly that's the focus, that's the bit that Eston have to go on because that's the national data set. But we're also looking at systems beyond that date and looking at you in the years after that point as well, because ultimately what we're committed to doing as officers and as council is make sure that we've got effective systems in place to make sure that as many young people get into a meaningful employment, training or education opportunity. And that means, that's part of our thinking around post-16 as well. We need to think about, the curriculum choices that we have, what happens for those youngsters who drop out, how do we know where these young people are. So clearly we've put a lot of investment in place to make sure that we've got staff embedded with Careers Wales, we've got systems in place to understand, what happens, and can we intervene? If you're in a course and then you fall out, are we interested because that happened after the date when we did the count? Well, obviously the answer is still yes. Now that's got some resource implications for us as a council going forward that we'll no doubt have to come back and look at each budget point in the years ahead, because that's going to be a pressure for us. I think that will also be there'll be implications for the work around NEETs, particularly when we get the new Education Act that's coming out around the LN reform. There's obviously a white paper out at the moment which extends our responsibility up to the age of 25 for making assessments and interventions for those pupils. So we're already looking at, what will the implications of that mean? How will that fit with what we're doing just around the NEETs piece of work at the moment? And really start to map pathways and systems around how we support learners all the way from preschool right through to 2025. So I think in Wales, if I'm honest, and without this is being webcast, I need to be careful. I think in some areas, I suspect people are very geared towards that date, and that's how they look at things. And I think if we're honest, that's what where we were some years ago. I don't think that's where we are anymore. But there will be pressures on us as council and as officers going forward about how do we maintain those systems in light of new demands and of changes in funding elsewhere. And I think that will continue to be a challenge. But for the moment, I think we're really addressing and have fully addressed our requirement in that regard.
Well, we talked about this at the pre-meeting, and I raised this because basically, yes, we can have them, the minute they go through the school gates, they're not a NEET. But by the time they arrive at, say, the job centre at 18, they've actually done practically nothing in those 2 years. And you can say we're addressing it, but who is actually monitoring what happens in those 2 years? Because they're not counted as unemployed or anything. There are no figures. They've left education. They can't sign on because they're not old enough. So who actually monitors them?
So careers, I think the honest answer is Careers Wales, but obviously we've got officers as well, and we've got systems in place now. So any child who doesn't go on, officers in the local authority will ask each of the schools who's going to stay on with you, what do you think their destinations are going to be. So we've put systems in place over the last 2 years to make sure that we know, and I think we'd only one. I was going to say unknown. With only one pupil, Dick Cheney, wasn't it? There was only one pupil who I think, and Karen again might be upset with me, it might have been 0, where we weren't sure where they were. So we've got systems in place to reconcile all the cohort, because we know who they are at 16, and where their destinations are. And we've got systems in place to make sure that we actively track those pupils, not just to find out where they are and where they aren't, but also to make sure that those young people have got meaningful advice about what their options are. And then we support, in terms of Karen's team, work to actually go out and meet those young people and offer them some choices and try and direct them into opportunities that are there, and work with them consistently over time, even if they say no initially, which, when young people are 16, while it's a pressure for us, it may not be the same pressure for them in their particular circumstances. So we don't accept no as an answer, as it were. We say, well, it's no for now, but we'll be coming back to see you again, and we'll talk to you again. And that's why I think our figure's now down to 2.2 in terms of needs, which is 9th. I'll confirm that if that's wrong, I'll come back. But I think that's where the published data came out last week. Okay.
That is the project that's funded then. Is it Positive Pathways, where we track the young people to make sure that they have got a pathway?
Yeah, that is part of that work.
Mr Davies?
It's just to come... again, the thing is with all the different organisations involved is that one of the... This is declare my interest as Vice Chair of the Common Centre for Young People, and it was a case which was brought to my attention by them of a young man going through a very difficult time and searching for that, and they were trying to help to get help of some kind. Problem is that if you went to one person, they said, "Oh, you got to go to them," and if you go to them, they said, "Oh no, you got to go to them," and then you go to them, they say, "Oh, you got to go to them," and they got to go to them. And I think that's one of the big is that I've had to work out who does what, who's responsible for what, and where, and particularly for a young person who may be going through a difficult time, or a young person who was just suddenly catapulted into the system. I mean, it's hard enough for older people, cleverer people, so-called, to be part of that system, but suddenly to face a 16, 17-year-old maybe was maybe hit problems, not just education, but also personal life as well. And I think that's the concern for a lot of people. Is quite frankly, is the system joined up?
I think that really comes into recommendation 5 in terms of why we think we've got more work to do in terms of the coordination of services and coordination of partnership working. Without knowing the individual circumstances of that particular young person, clearly I can't comment. One of the things that we know we're actively engaged in at the moment is looking at the coordination of services that we currently have in place, and also making sure that they're the right ones in the right place at the right time for young people. One of the tensions for us in that is that lots of the funding that's available, for some of that work has got grant conditions attached, and we are in this position sometimes that we're asked to do the same piece of work 3 different ways, which maybe isn't the right way of us coordinating our provision matrix for young people. So I think we are looking at how we can simplify schools' access to support from Families First and other community services colleagues, for instance, and from third sector and other statutory partners, and that will impact over time on how we realign some of the services for children and young people. And I think that's part of our work going on at the moment. There will always be individual circumstances, however, where a young person gets into difficulty and they're going to experience some confusion about where they need to go next, but I think we've got a range of systems in place. It's just about making sure that that young person is, I'm confident, I would say this, I am confident for the young people who are not in school post-16 that we know who they are and where they are. Whether or not that young person wants to access some of the services that we've got available is a separate issue. But where there are individual instances where counsellors or anyone's aware of young people not being able to find the right support, then there are named officers in place that you can come to. Certainly comes through me, comes through Sharon. We'll put you in touch with who that person is and get that support to that young person. Because one of the commitments, I think, one of the strengths of our partnership is even where we've got, we do have disagreements between partners, that's part of a normal relationship. But there's an absolute commitment to try and make sure that we get support to children and young people at the right point in the right way. And so I'm confident that we'll be able to actually get that support to that young person if it's within our gift to do so. So I'd come and have a discussion with, obviously, with Compliance Centre for Children and Young People with Dave, contacts directly with me, contacts with other partners. Come and use those.
Councillor Karen, sorry, Calvin.
In a previous incarnation, I used to be the executive member for Leisure, Youth and Culture and sat as the chairman on the Young Persons Partnership. This has always been, historically, a very difficult area. And because we measure 16, but other people measure 24, other people measure 25, other people measure 18. So this has always been a difficult area. I actually look at this and I actually believe you when it says, we believe we have fully addressed this recommendation. But I do have concerns going forward. I mean, I know we had something like £1.2 million worth of grant aid. And, it is significant, I think, that we've gone from 6.7 now to 2.2. I'm not convinced we would have done it without all that grant aid. And what concerns me is that much of that grant aid is not going to be there going forward. And one of the other things that concerns me is that as schools focus towards what they really need, what they feel they really need to do, which is the Key Stage 4 results, in time, I think we're going to find ourselves back where we were, well, maybe not at 6.7, but I think we're going to find ourselves slowly drifting off this 2.2 back towards 3 and perhaps even 4 and maybe even worse.
Well, obviously we're drifting downwards, not upwards at the moment, so we're continuing to improve. Is there a danger that if we don't keep a focus on valuing every single individual young person, knowing where they are in terms of their learning, knowing what's the next step for them, which has been a theme, I think, through what I've been saying in this report today, that the fact that we now know our pupils and youngsters in a way that we didn't before. Well, actually, culturally, we've shifted, we've changed as an organisation, and by organisation I include head teachers and governors and children themselves, and I think parents. I think parents have got a different experience now of their children in school and the feedback they're getting about their children than they had 3 or 4 years ago. So that's a choice that we need to make. Now, I would obviously say that we're very clear that, notwithstanding the fact that the grants are being cut left, right, and centre at the moment, and that's something that we've continued to manage with schools. There've been cuts in-year cuts to school effectiveness grant. There've been cuts to the EIG in terms of the total funding available for different education grants, and in social care and everywhere else. The issue for us is that we've put systems in place again, which mean that we've had the benefit of that grant, which other people had too. Okay, And we've improved our performance much more quickly than most other authorities. In fact, we were the fastest improvement authority in Wales, I think, last year in terms of needs. So, is there a danger that we could slip? Absolutely. Yeah. The danger is that we allow ourselves to think, without the grant, we can't do anything, and that's clearly not the case, and we've demonstrated that already. So we need to maintain our focus. We need to make sure that we continue to know where our pupils are, understand what the size of the risk is, and manage that. And frankly, I think we're well positioned to do that, but there will be challenges, which I've already said in my contribution, that we'll be bringing back to Council to say, here are some of the risks that we need to manage together. And if we don't invest in this way, then we may see some change in terms of that performance, but I think we can manage that, and as I say, I think we have fully addressed it. The other point I would make very quickly, Chair, is we need to be careful that in terms of this report, it's written about the recommendations and what Eston said in their original report back in 2011. It's not about necessarily all the things that we would want to achieve and our aspirations going forward. It's about those recommendations. So I think we've addressed the recommendation. Does that mean there's not a lot more we need to do? Well, no, that's another discussion, and that's part of our aspirations going forward.
Improve the quality and consistency of the evaluation of services to inform planning more effectively. Sir Rees.
You've stated in the report that heads are on board. How do you really know that?
Truth serum? No. We lace the coffee. Right, how do I know that? And I forgive me if I'm repeating some of the things I've said earlier. In terms of where we are, in terms of the national model, in terms of the data systems, in terms of the tracking, I think we now have a level of openness about performance, which culturally for us as council and I think for schools is quite different again from back where we were in 2011. So sharing of data, clarity of data with governors and with the local authority is now in a very, very different place from when the original report was written. So I don't want to use the phrase there's no hiding place, but we now have a very open, frank discussion with schools about performance. And there's an expectation that where performance isn't where we think it should be, and that's what schools are saying, but we thought we would be here and not, that there's an expectation that the challenge is there. Now that challenge is given by the ES on our behalf through the Challenge Advisor, through Sharon, through the work I do with schools, and that you do with schools as well. That wasn't the case 4 or 5 years ago. And so I think we've got better systems in terms of understanding what our performance actually is. We've talked already about how we're tackling some of our less than accurate assessments, around teacher assessment and so on. We've got those tracking systems in place. We've got better reporting and sharing of information. And we've got a series of systems in place where schools can get support if they're not performing as well as they should be. And that involves a certain amount of challenge as well. So I think we're much better informed overall. In terms of within the education system, I think we've put better measures in place to look at our own team plans, and this sort of leads into performance management as well. We're mirroring the performance management process that chief officers have coming into cabinet and having performance reviews, for example, and we're doing that within our teams within the education service. So in a few weeks' time, each of the teams will be coming in to meet with me and the leadership team, the management team in the service to look at individual performance, from named accountability right through to where the whole team is performing. So I think we've shifted culture, we've got new tools in place, and I think incredibly importantly for me, there's an expectation that challenge is there, and that's seen as a positive. So do I have confidence that all schools are happy with that and feel that the national categorisation model, for example, is something that they feel comfortable with? Probably not. I think that's a fair reflection. But I think heads do recognise the need to be seen to be accountable, to have that information available for all stakeholders. And I think most heads welcome that challenge because they can tell a good story.
Any other questions there? Councillor?
Yeah, I mean, It's the item that's mentioned on page 47, where we're talking about challenging performance and support arrangements. I realise that it's slightly off track, but it says right at the bottom, the EAS is currently preparing a business case. On receipt of the business case, the local authority will be drafting a local annex with the EAS, although we have yet to receive the guidance document. I'm just sort of wondering if we've got any timescales, have we got any ideas, are we moving forward?
The business case and the annex have been submitted to Welsh Government. I'm not sure we actually saw the guidance before we went in, but that's something that we've raised with Steve Vincent, who is actually the chair of our recovery board, and we've raised it at the last recovery board. So the way the business case is obviously a requirement from the Minister to each of the consortia, not just to us and the EAS, to look at the range of the work, and that's specified within the National Model for Regional Working. So then the annex is looking at the particular outcomes that we expect in Torvine. That, in effect, has been the target setting process that we've talked about on and off throughout this discussion. The outcome of that target setting process is, in effect, our annex, and that's been submitted to the Minister. So I was anticipating we would have more detail, but that wasn't forthcoming from Welsh Government. Bearing in mind this is the first year of the national model proper, as it were, so I expect, and it's something we'll raise at the Recovery Board coming up in a few weeks' time, will we see some further guidance for next year's, but that's already been submitted to Welsh Government.
Any more questions on this topic?
Just about the Recovery Board, and was it in November you met, or last year, end of last year? What was the last meeting you had with them? March, was it? So would the committee be able to see the minutes of that meeting? I'm not sure we've had that particular one, and I'm sure that should be possible. Obviously, the Welsh Government minutes, so, but I can't imagine there's any reason why the board wouldn't be able to see those. Absolutely.
Any other questions? Are we happy there? Move on then to 5, improve the performance management of services. Any questions?
Sort of going back to comments that Councillor Cameron made about governing bodies. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that the governing bodies need to become more professionalised, however you define that. What are we doing to try and help them in that, and what could we be doing more, thinking forward to sort of 2016, 2017 and beyond?
We've looked into this and worked with EAS and recognised, yes, there is governor training, mandatory and statutory governor training from EAS, but there's also gaps. We feel that, there could be more. So Torvine, we're going to pilot, if you like, a governor consultancy. But we've had the backing with EAS. We're working alongside them, but we're initially driving it, where we feel that what it will entail is that chairs of governors that are working very successfully and effectively in schools can then go and support other governing bodies, because we've all got different strengths and weaknesses, governing bodies have, and depending on circumstances and different issues that arise within the school, they may need more support and expertise. We have put an advert out. We have shortlisted 4 governors, and we're in the process now, end of April, where they'll be trained up and then hopefully ready to be rolled out after May half term to go and work with other governing bodies where we feel that they need support, and also not just us, where schools need. The whole point of this consultancy is that schools recognise and the governing body recognise their strengths and weaknesses and come to us rather than the other way round and say, oh look, we have this concern, we have this issue, we're not quite sure how can we go about it. And it's a way then of developing the skills of that school's governing bodies.
Is that done on a voluntary basis or is it paid?
It'll be paid. Those consultant governors will be paid, and for the next year, the LA are paying schools. They're picking up the tab. the hope is that if it works the following year, then that schools will pay for this service, a small fee towards this service.
So in terms of pay, we're talking about expenses, reasonable expenses and so on. So we're not talking about they're going to have a salary and that there's a huge bill associated with that, but clearly they will be paid reasonable expenses, and obviously there's a cost of the training. So we're picking up the element of that. The other point just to make there is that the Welsh Government are also reviewing the role of Governors Wales, and in fact our Torfaen Association of School Governors were visited by Carl Naparella, who will now be in our recovery board in place of Bethan Guilfoyle, who's leaving Welsh Government, to talk about what they would like to see happening in terms of Governors Wales. So we're obviously part of that discussion as well, and we continue to work with governors about what other training and what other support they might want. So this is one part of trying to build on top of the contract we already have with the EAS, who provide the clerking and other sort of types of support. But governors have asked, particularly where they're faced with, one of the issues that came up was post Section 47 investigation, where there's a child protection concern, and while no criminal proceedings are going to be brought against a member of staff, for instance, the governing body are asked to then investigate and look at it. That's been an issue that governors have said, actually, that would be really helpful to have some support on. So those are the sorts of issues that we're going to try and make sure that these consultant governors, if you like, it's a bit like school-to-school work, this is governor-to-governor work, can then provide that support over and above what we're already getting from the EAS.
Karen, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I do have some concerns. I mean, I've been a school governor since 1989. School governors didn't do a fat lot in 1989. I mean, I've got to be fair. They you know, you turned up once every term, and you had a report from the head teacher, and you all went home, and that was the end of it. We all now know, those of us particularly, you governors of secondary schools, that it is a considerable amount of work for unpaid volunteers who, in the most, are actually in full-time employment, particularly parent governors, but also some of the co-optees. And are we confident that we can continue to recruit enough governors of the correct calibre that we can do this work?
I think there's an issue nationally, and it's something that the government itself is looking at about, given the demands, both in time and in terms of the intellectual demand, because schools are complex organisations, and this, you know, doesn't need saying, does it? So it's a hugely demanding role if it's done really well. Now, there will need to be a change in guidance or even primary legislation to look at changing the nature of governing bodies, because obviously that's tied into the current legislative framework. But I know that's something that Welsh Government are looking at as well. In the meantime, clearly the local authority's role is to support governing bodies in offering training and offering, if there's any way that we can support them in recruiting new members, then we will. But our role is quite limited in the sense that we obviously can't tell governing bodies who they should be recruiting, etc. So we'll continue to work with chairs of governors and governing bodies about making sure that where they feel they need more support, more guidance, we'll always be receptive to that message. We'll work with the EAS, and in this instance, as Shannon's just outlined, where we feel actually there's a better solution that we can bring to bear more quickly, that we'll put something in place. But it is a challenge. Most people here are probably on governing, or I think are on governing bodies, and governors have to tackle with the head teacher some very difficult issues, and that puts huge demands on everyone. So we really are conscious of the contribution that governors make, and that can't be underestimated. And if we can offer other support, we will. But I think that's something that Welsh Government are also mindful of. Will we get to a position where there will be paid governors? Or professional governors or professional role? I think that's something that's been entertained and looked at. Whether or not that's where we get to, we'll have to wait and see what Welsh Government come to.
Ask on that then. Are we confident that we've got the central support of HR and finance to support the governing bodies and schools?
In terms of finance, the feedback we have, obviously all schools, the majority, I think now all, schools are in a service level agreement for finance services, and that's regularly quality assured. So I'm confident that by and large we get very good support from finance. In terms of HR, there have been issues over this year, Council made a decision to reduce HR support. That was part of one of the budget savings that we looked at previously. We've been working very closely with Nigel's team and with HR to look at is there any way of further enhancing the support we get from HR. And while I can't confirm quite yet that that's been successful, I'm very optimistic that we'll see some very positive news in terms of increased capacity from HR to schools in the very near future.
Because I think that is something that came up in our sort of schools monitoring sessions as well. So that would be good news. Councillor Brooks.
Yes, with regard to governors, can you tell me, with the governing bodies of the school here in Torvine, how many vacancies currently exist for governors on governing bodies? Is every governing body have the appropriate number of governors set out at the present moment? How many are we missing?
Chair, in order to answer that, I'll have to go to the EAS and ask that question, but I can ask that and get that information. One of the things I am keen to look at is the role, right, A, how many vacancies are there, but it would be useful to know what type of vacancies perhaps there are as well, in terms of governors, and local authority appointees, which I know for some governing bodies is a particular issue where there are gaps. So I think that's an issue for us as a local authority to also look at, is how do we make sure that where we've got direct control over actually who's appointed, that we, A, make sure those vacancies are filled and they're filled with high calibre candidates who can really do that work. So we'll look into that and we'll come back to you as quickly as we can.
From that, because this is something of a problem, isn't it? Take, for example, nominees from the LEA. You find yourself in a position where you just can't do all of this work physically because we're going to need an 8th day in the week. I mean, I'm appointed to the board of Bronavon, and it's treated somewhat as a bit of a joke sometimes. That's a £100 million company. It's not 5 minutes down the road for a, this is what it is. And my concern is, I've been involved with governing bodies for an awful long time. And from the time when I started to today, there is nothing which is even remotely close to being the same. You're now responsible for effectively running a school. And you're accountable for it. And then, having given up your time to do it as that person, there's somebody then turning around and saying, if you don't do this, we'll remove you as a governor. I suspect that there'll be a lot of governors who might turn around and say, well, carry on and remove me then, because I'm not doing it. And I think that this is where all the issues are. We are expecting, in this country, for people to do everything for nothing, and then be held accountable for it if it goes wrong. The question I ask is, why would anybody in their right mind want to do that? And, as I say, it is the expectation of what people can actually do. We will have some form of reorganisation of local government in the not-too-distant future. There will then be, as a result of that, because the whole aspect of that is to reduce cost, also reduce the number of elected members. So, when you reduce those, I don't think it's perhaps unreasonable to say probably by 50%. Who the hell is going to be doing all of this work? And for me, this is where all of the worry comes in, and that's why I asked the question as to how many governing bodies are short of governors at the moment. I got a good idea, I already know the answer. But at the end of the day, it's not just that then, it's the recruitment of new people to come along. Well, old sods like me have to give it up. And this is the bit that I think that's key for me, and I really think that this needs to be given some serious thought.
So, Chair, we'll get that information from the ES. The one thing I would say is that lots and lots and lots of people in Torvine see the contribution that they can make and do volunteer the time. And you know, our governing bodies are all functioning. Some of them aren't fully, haven't got the full contingent there. So one of the things I'm keen to do is to build on that really strong cadre that we have in many governing bodies, and to help people understand what the commitment is and what the support is. Because I think, you know, if you're going to volunteer yourself, you should really know what you're getting yourself into. But you should also know what support you're going to have as well. And I think there is more work that we can do there, because we want the really, the best possible people to come forward. Running the schools ahead teacher is a really tough job. Having a governing body who are there with you is really important for us in terms of our school improvement journey. To get the best possible governors there, so the governors feel secure, they know what they're doing, they know the support that they can have, they know where to turn to if things are a little bit not quite where they should be. And at schools, leadership teams in schools can have really strong relationships with their governing bodies, so we get better outcomes for children. So we'll look into that in terms of the numbers, but be assured that is something that we recognise is critical to our overall improvement journey as well.
Any other questions there? That you say we believe this recommendation is largely addressed in the education service. So are there any gaps that you wish to tell us about?
Sorry, Chair. I was reading a note there and I completely missed it. Gaps in terms of...
Improve the performance management of services.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah. In terms of the education service, clearly... Well, starting in a different place. The reason why performance management came on as a recommendation was because our performance was weak. We didn't know ourselves well enough. Therefore, the logic is, well, you couldn't have been tracking your performance adequately, because otherwise you would have done something about it and you would have had better performance. So I think, again, without recapping on the ground we've been, in terms of looking at performance in schools, I think we've talked about tracking systems, we've talked about the different layers of intervention we now have with the EAS, and about how we know where we are much more effective, much better than we did before. I think within the education service there has been a laxness in terms of looking at work smarts, which is obviously the tool that we use in terms of looking at individual accountability and also training and support for staff, which for me is also part of performance management, clearly. So we've introduced a new system that we're just bringing in. We've got the first cycle of it coming up, which is looking at team plans now being reviewed, not only with your direct line manager, but also actually with the leadership team within the education service. So the management team within the education service will collectively review every single team plan and every element within it. We've also introduced a cycle of updating Finnin that's linked into that performance management system, because in the past within education there's been a laxness is probably an underestimate of how we've been using the corporate performance management systems. So we're addressing that also. And I think culturally, which I've mentioned before, I think we're in a different place now. People expect to be asked how well they're doing and where they're stuck. And that's part of the openness that we're trying to create within the education service, that performance management isn't just about, oh, someone's going to come and ask me, have I done this? It's also about, well, can you recognise, and I expect to be recognised for the contribution I've made and how well I've done. And clearly, listening to some of the feedback we've had through the employee survey, we weren't doing that well enough in the past. So we're building that into our performance management structure as well, so people don't just see it as, oh, it's that onerous performance management session. It's about an opportunity to say how well they're doing and to ask for the tools that they need to do better. So it's about their training needs as well. And that's now, we haven't fully addressed it because we're just embedding that. That's been put in place. And I'm very confident by the time that we come to the next monitoring visit, that will be fully embedded.
Questions, members? Councillor Davis?
Look at this bit here about information. was in part 5, is that saying that the concern can sometimes be that it seems that in the past there wasn't enough information, or it was irrelevant information. Now, we're all concerned of are we having too much information? We seem to be bombarded with measures and this, that and the other, and we've got to know it all and all the rest of it. Again, how do we keep it relevant to the matter in hand? Indeed, sometimes, do we more concerned with getting information and we lose sight of what really is the matter in hand, which is the young people of this fair borough. And how do we ensure that the information helps them?
I think that is the critical point. We're information rich, but actually what purpose are we using it for, and how is that actually just directing where we go next? I think that the need to remain vigilant, that we're not simply telling ourselves that we're doing well because we've achieved the things that we said we would do, without that really having any meaning for young people and children themselves is the heart of your question. I think one of the things that's been really helpful for us in terms of the recovery board is early on we took a report. In fact, it was the first recovery board meeting we went to, and they asked us for an update on the post-inspection action plan. And because we put timescales against each of the actions of when we would have done them, we marked them all green. So almost everything was green. And the very question that you've just asked, they posted and said, but so what? So you've gone ahead and done that. What difference has that made to anybody other than you've actually done a piece of activity that you say you would do? So one of the ongoing discussions I think we're having with head teachers is, it comes back to teacher assessment, for example, how relevant, how meaningful is this piece of work that we're doing, this information we're collecting. And I think we'll never take our eye off that particular poll again. So the measures that we're looking at in terms of knowing that we're moving forward may well come back down to that raft of information that you've got as a summary sheet today in terms of those outcomes at Key Stage 4, along with exclusions and attendance. But that isn't the whole picture either. So some of the work that we need to do with schools now is about looking at value added, is about understanding what progress children are really making, and in a holistic sense as well. One of the dangers that we're facing at the moment, I think, is that we just focus on those performance measures, and somehow we lose the child in the middle of that. So one of the things I'm keen to look at with schools is how do we make sure we don't simply turn into the exam factory, that maybe some authorities are finding themselves being pushed into, and we remember the whole child, and we have a sense of what a pupil's achievement is as well as their attainment. And I think that's an active and ongoing debate that we're having. But still focusing in on what are those key performance measures. So how are we comparing ourselves within the consortia and across Wales so that you as elected members understand that baseline performance. So we can't lose sight of that, but there's more as well. But there is a bit of an art form there, but clearly I think we've talked at some length about how we know where we are at the moment in terms of those key measures, but there may be other things that we need to look at too in terms of the richness of what education brings to children.
Can I just one other thing? Have you ever said to Estin, you're measuring the wrong thing?
Not officially. But there are opportunities when you can have those discussions with colleagues from Estin in the room. So that's all I'll say on that.
Shall we move on then to all the questions? The last item there, last recommendation, implement effective governance arrangements for work of the CYPB. And this is all about partnership working. And I think you say there that the recommendation's been largely addressed.
Can I just ask, with regards to the Children's and Young First Board, who on there is representing Welsh Medium?
In terms of specific, I'm not sure we actually have a particular rep from, but then the same point could be raised about who have we got from faith-based education, who have we got from other particular groups. So one of the things that is being looked at is actually what is the range of representation on that particular body. So that's obviously something that the board itself can always look at, and where individuals or groups would like to have their voice represented directly, then they make that request. But clearly that board is a representative. You have layers of partnership clearly there, because you've got colleagues from health, the police, social care, the fire service, etc., as well as education and community services and third sector, who then also have their own partnerships, and representation may be at a different level. So what I would say is I don't think there's particular representation specifically at the moment, but that's something that can be looked at and would be addressed to the chair of the board.
Any other questions? No? Could I just ask where we are with the ALN review as part of this, please?
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we've got a pre-agenda meeting tomorrow morning for the next heads meeting, we've commissioned Leslie Bush, who's the head teacher at Cronbridge Special School, to take the lead on the work that we'd said to Cabinet that we needed to look at in terms of where we are with the proposals around the role of the moderate learning difficulties special needs resource basis, and that work's advancing. And a new model is emerging from those discussions with those schools, chairs, governing bodies, and with Leslie. There's a piece of work that's likely to come on the agenda for the next heads meeting, specifically around that, and around the piece of work around the behaviour resource base, whether we need it or not in primary schools, together with some work around the delegation is the wrong word, the direct control of the additional learning needs budget by schools themselves, and that was tied in with the idea of having cluster Olenkos. So there's, I anticipate I'll be bringing back an update paper to Cabinet in May, and that will look at giving an update on where we are, and also next steps in terms of some of the changes from where we were at the last paper. So that is moving on. And as I say, I anticipate that we'll be having a session with heads next week to look at some of that detail. That will lead to an update to Cabinet after that.
Sharon, thank you. Okay, members, then, if we go back to our scrutiny activity, are there any points that we wish to make to the executive member about progress?
I think, I mean, it would be difficult to be anything other than reasonably pleased with the improvements. There's been a 10% increase. We've moved significantly up the table. However, I think I do have some concerns about going forward. I mean, some issues that I mentioned about NEETs, with the fact that the funding, the grant funding is disappearing. And obviously issues around future budgets in education. I mean, we are putting in place a lot of stuff in a lot of schools. I mean, a lot of schools are now employing people to chase up absent pupils that they may not be able to do in future. So whilst I am reasonably pleased at the pace of, I'm not ecstatic about it. I agree with what Pam said earlier about the fact that there's been a lot of children that have been failed, basically, by the system in Torbain in the past. But I do have some concerns about going forward, that it's going to be a lot more difficult, I think, than it has been to get the improvements that we've got now. I think going forward, particularly 2 or 3 years from now, once the recovery board goes and the budgets are starting to drop off, I think it's going to be very difficult to maintain this position going forward.
So we're reasonably pleased with the progress made to date. We would like to see the pace of that improvement speeded up. But we recognise that there are risks along the way, and I think we need to outline some of our concerns.
An issue as well, like, you know, this has been about with the snow for what, 4 years?
Yeah.
And you know how I reacted last time when I was told that new things were being put in place. And I thought, hang on a minute, like, you know, surely we should be coming to a conclusion here. And I think that what we're going to ask people to focus on is the conclusion. When is there should now be an estimated date as to when things are going to come to fruition. Other than that, it's just going to go on forever. And the point which has been made by Glenn about funding, because there's an awful lot, particularly with the NEETs, which is funded from, shall we say, I don't know, other means and everything. I think that's the best way I could describe it, because I can't remember where some of the funding is coming from. But at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that this is... You plan for something this year, and there's absolutely no guarantee it's going to be there next year. And for me, that's a major, major issue. And Nigel made the point about the CCYP, as you know, I'm chairman of that. And it's just an ongoing nightmare, quite frankly, about the funding. And if the funding's not there, the work ain't going to get done.
Okay, Tom, would you like to outline something?
I would like to make...
Sorry. Oh, can I just say, I think we ought to put in there somehow. I know we've said about how long is it going to take, but I think we as councillors will actually have seen a whole group of children go through their comprehensive education with the authority basically in special measures. So that's an awful thought for the parents.
I didn't switch my microphone for that comment. I would like to make a comment about the Schools Challenge Cymru money, because I think that is also a risk going forward. It does concern me that there is this issue where the LA is responsible, but the reporting is to the Minister. And I don't think it is, I mean, it's obviously something that we can't do anything about, but I think it is honestly incorrect that a school should be reporting directly to the Minister on issues that we are held responsible for. And I don't think that it would be a bad idea to push that forward to somewhere else within Welsh Government, rather than, because we've seen the reply we got from the Minister, which I was deeply unhappy about. And I think it should go somewhere in Welsh Government to say that, you know, we don't think that it's fair that we are held responsible for something that the Minister is doing and monitoring. And I would hate for the case to come up sometime in the future where when Schools Challenge Cymru is a success, the Minister gets the plaudits, and when it's a failure, the LA get the beating.
I think that is something we can raise. Obviously, we raised it in the Schools Monitoring Committee, so it will be something that perhaps not all members are aware of, but it's certainly there's something that we can make some recommendations on.
Obviously, having attended 2 meetings now, and on both meetings I've raised points about communication. And at no stage, when I've asked those direct questions about, well, what's being done, there seems to be no clear definition. On both occasions, it's been a case of, oh, well, we used to do something along those lines, and we need to do something again in the future, but there's no, oh, we're going to do that tomorrow. There's not, about with regards to, we all accept, you know what I mean, it's a joint responsibility between the Education Board and obviously parents, but we have to work to engage those people. And we know there's an awful lot of apathetic parents with regards to education because their work prospects aren't fantastic, so they don't feel that there's a great deal of point in ensuring their children engage in education. But there's also, without doing the work, we're just assuming that every parent knows every situation with regard to their child. And the Education Board seems to, the local authority, seem to be doing nothing about it. I've challenged that twice now. I've challenged them on that issue. And I've got deep concerns that we seem to be attacking what's on a bit of paper, and rather than looking at the bigger picture, well, hang on, everybody's accountable, and we can go, oh, well, we're the local authority, we've done everything we can. Well, actually, no, we haven't. We haven't tried to engage anybody else other than ourselves.
I think that's a really good point, actually, and I think, engaging with parents and communications is something I think we should put as one of our recommendations.
I mean, my thing is this.
For further work.
Yeah, just that thing of like, well, what are you doing? What are you going to, please tell us, what are you actually doing? Not, oh, well, we used to do this or we used to do that. What are you actually going to do?
I haven't got a massive Just going back to what Councillor Karen was saying, you did talk briefly about it at pre-agenda around writing to the chair of the Education Scrutiny Committee, equivalent in Welsh Government, to look at your concerns with regards to Schools Challenge Cymru. There was Sean's point around raising aspirations and informing parents around attendance and the importance of attendance, and using the positive messages rather than the negative stick that often gets used. Dermot mentioned arrangements if we were to get out of special measures, and what relationships we then have with the Recovery Board. Would we sever our ties, or would we look to continue some kind of informal relationship? And I don't know whether members had a view on what we should do going forward, whether members would welcome that continued support, or whether we should look to go alone. I got the feeling at the time that you would welcome continued support from the Recovery Board. But
yeah. There's a point. Who actually pays for all of this? Who's paying for it? Because at the end of the day, we have a recovery board in place. They're there to do a job. It's task and finish, and goodbye. That's what it should be. I quite appreciate there might be, shall we say, a transition. Instead of it switched off, that it tails off, or something like that. But the recovery board is put there for a purpose. And then after that, one would imagine, because our officers' time in dealing with the recovery board is in addition to the day-to-day job, isn't it? So for as long as they have to keep dealing with the recovery board, they can't put their full time into the job that they're actually here to do. I know it's all links and comes part of it, but at some stage it's got to come to an end at some stage, isn't it? Now, I don't think that, well, I certainly never expected the recovery board to be here as long as they've been here now. I just quite honestly thought that we would bring in a group of people in here who were going to be. Glyn and I found ourselves involved in on a couple of occasions of being put in as special governors into schools to go and look at them. And we were very focused upon the fact that it meant that you had to go there and do a job and get an outcome at the end of the day. And if you like, that's the point that I'm trying to make. Like, you know, there has to be a cost associated with everything, and given that money is so tight, you know, I think that would have to be time-scaled.
I think the idea is that the Children and Young People's Partnership Board would be take over the role really of the Recovery Board, and it would be up to us then as a scrutiny committee to scrutinise as well. So the board is being trained. I mean, there's partners on that board with all different interests, so they would be part of the scrutiny, and then we've got our part to play as well. So that's my view of it. But you know, certainly, if you wanted to make a recommendation, if we have the minutes of the board, of the Recovery Board, and of the Children's Board as well, we can perhaps see, you know, the way forward.
I would say in that, I mean, we slipped, and the Recovery Board came in and we went into special measures. I would not like to see us slip again. So I personally do believe that any help after we come out of special measures is necessary and welcome. I mean, I also think, and I made this comment, I haven't made it today before, but I made this comment in the pre-agenda meeting. There are members of the Cabinet who have specific involvements in this area of work. Obviously, you would expect the resources and learning agendas to be particularly involved. The leader, the deputy, and the social services element. I mean, obviously, you then come to something like neighbourhoods. You wouldn't expect the executive member for neighbourhoods. You know, he's about emptying bins and sorting out the streetlights. But I would like to think that those 5 members of the Cabinet were deeply involved in ensuring that we do not slip at some future date from the path that I feel that we are now on. And it's been a long time getting to that path, as Steve has said. So I think we need to sort of make the point, I think, to the Cabinet that they do need to be, I feel, even more involved, I would say, because I don't want to give the impression that the Cabinet isn't involved, but I would like to say I feel the Cabinet should be even more involved, particularly those 5 members of the Cabinet, in order to ensure that when the Recovery Board goes, nobody's taken their foot off the accelerator.
Any other comments there? Tom, did you wish to?
Yeah, sorry. There was comments around the NEETS performance measure that's being used, and there seems to be a general feeling that the measure isn't really fit for purpose, and whether there needs to be more of a stronger performance measurement framework for 16 to 18-year-olds. Pam's comment, who's monitoring these people in the time that they leave school to the time they present themselves to the job centre. There were a couple of requests for further information around the Recovery Board minutes, governing body vacancies. There was another potential recommendation around representatives on the CYPP. Mel made the comment about who's representing Welsh Medium and whether there needs to be reps for other groups as well. In your hands.
I think we've got an issue with
the NEETS funding.
I think we've got a problem with the NEETS because that is a Welsh Government measure that Estyn are a measure, and we measured on it. But it depends on who you're talking to as to which measurements they use. So the one that they're referring to here is the one we've got to have. We may not like it, but it's the one we've got to have. So you know, I think we're a bit stuck with that one.
I think that, although we can say we're pleased with the progress that's been made,
yes,
we must appreciate that there could be concerns and risks with any funding that come forward. So
very much
the good
so.
progress we've made could be put at risk of funding.
It's all grant funded.
And I think also that, as I said, because we are to that measure, and it's and the thing is that it was the question I said: is that measure the right measure?
Well,
I mean, actually, that's something we can actually take to Estin.
I think the point as well, we should be welcoming actually the extra support that Dermot said is hoping to put into HR for schools, because that's something that we have asked for. So I think, okay. Sorry.
Well, I just think because education takes up such a big proportion of the money that we have to spend as an LA, it doesn't bear any resemblance to the amount that it is discussed in, say, full council or even seminars. We seem to get small, I'm not saying small people, but you seem to get seminars on all sorts of little bits of things, when I think to me, the most important thing that has gone on since I've been here is the fact that the schools were failing.
Emphasis on education as a
but I think again,
council members
is that maybe again as councillors, how much actual feedback do we actually get from our constituents about the education service? Virtually none. And the only thing, the only concern you actually get about school, you get a lot of time from about schools, is basically, what are you going to do with all the cars parked outside schools? Not about the actual schools themselves.
Happy to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point there, because it falls into what I said about the executive, I think. When the recovery board goes, we need, as an authority, to make sure that we've got our foot on the pedal, on the accelerator pedal. Not the brake pedal, the accelerator pedal. And I think that is something I think we need to go forward, and I think we need to make that point to the council as a whole, really, that we really need to focus on education for the remainder of our term of office and even into the next one.
There was just one other potential thing that sprung to mind. Councillor Cameron asked early on, what are we doing so right in science, looking at the results, and the response was that in many ways they're sort of playing the system and using BTEX to boost the figures. And then Councillor Thomas asked, because Dermot then said that we would no longer be allowed to do that going forward. So Councillor Thomas then asked, in which case, if that percentage is going to go down, how is that going to affect all the other ones? And then Dermot said, well, don't worry, because everyone else is doing it. But if you look at the science figures, we have gone from 20th to 2nd. So I do wonder if everybody else is doing it to the same extent, and whether there's I don't know whether there's anything that needs to be looked at.
That's a sensible point to ask. Are we playing the system a lot more than everybody else?
But if the system is changing next year, then would that potentially hit us harder than everyone else? And the last thing we want is nasty surprises.
It is the key stage 4 inclusive, isn't it? That is the big figure. So the only way that's terribly going to affect that is the science results are going to be less. So I can't see it's going to have a huge impact on that particular figure.
Not a massive one, I wouldn't have thought, but you know, science it's your best 5 GCSEs, including English, maths, or Welsh and maths. So it could have an effect, and equally with the level 2 threshold and the CSI. So whether it's worth some investigation.
Okay, thank you. But with these few comments.
Okay, thank you, members. We go on then to Agenda 7, which is the reports there of the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee, and just an update for you on pages 67, 68, 69, 70 and 71. Okay.
Well, other than to say I'm a little disappointed that Westmont. I can understand why, and having read the comments from the LEA, I can understand why recommendation 2 has not been accepted by both the LEA, the head, the chair of governors, and the school. Although I think perhaps a little bit less so with the head and chair of governors than the LEA. I mean, the LEA cannot be seen to be favouring. But I am concerned that the other 2 recommendations made to the school have not been accepted. Crossy Cardiog accepted both of our recommendations, and I think it would be. I think it would be remiss of us if we did not mention the fact that we are disappointed that Westmont has chosen not to accept any of our recommendations.
I think we did agree that we would perhaps invite them back in for a further session. I'm looking at Lynn to make sure. We did agree that we would invite Westmont back for a further session following their results, so we'll take it from there. Is item 8 exclusion of press and public? So